Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Liberated Leadership Interview Series. I'm your host, Steve Cuss, and today we have a truly extraordinary guest who's about to take us on a captivating journey into the world of leadership and team dynamics. In this series, we engage in heartfelt conversations with experienced leaders, peeling back the layers of their incredible leadership journeys. We explore the very essence of the liberated leadership model, seeking to uncover the secrets to successful leadership and team collaboration. Today's guest is no exception. She's a force to be reckoned with in the world of leadership and team culture. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the brilliant and inspiring Alison Coward. Alison is the founder of Bracket, a consultancy that partners with ambitious and forward-thinking companies to help them build high-performing and collaborative team cultures. She's not just a consultant, she's a strategist, a workshop facilitator, a coach, a trainer, and a captivating keynote speaker. Alison is also the author of the highly acclaimed A Pocket Guide to Effective Workshops and her forthcoming book, Workshop Culture, A Guide to Building Teams That Thrive, is set to be published in November 2023. With an impressive list of clients that includes industry giants like Google, Meta, the World Federation of Advertisers, Welcome, and the V&A, Alison's experience is sought after by the very best. With 2 decades of experience working in, leading and facilitating creative teams, Alison is deeply passionate about finding the perfect balance between creativity, productivity and collaboration. Her mission? To help teams thrive and do their absolute best work together. Right, thanks so much for joining us today, Alison. And so let's start by going way back, if we could, right to your adolescence, if we could. What sort of teenager were you? And when you look back on that, do you see any signs that you might have been the type of person to take leadership responsibility?
Probably, yeah. I think that I did tend to... Well, actually, let me sort of go back a little bit. I think as a younger child, I was quite shy and retiring. But as I got into my teens and sort of senior school, I guess I started to become a little bit more of a leader and become more, come more into my own personality. I remember, the thing that I remember that's kind of popping out is we did a yearbook. It was something that, I don't even know if we initiated it. I think that I probably did with a few of my friends, which is kind of another thing. But in the yearbook, like I was the kind of person in the pictures that was kind of making all the little jokes and things like that. So I think, there was kind of an element there.
Was there a most likely to for you?
I don't know if it was a most likely to, but I remember standing out in some of the images, and I now we're having the conversation. I haven't thought about it for years, but I think I, along with a few friends, initiated it. And I think I just used to initiate a lot of stuff. Actually, I was very bizarrely over the last couple of weeks. I've been thinking about when I was younger. There was this Saturday morning TV show called Going Live, and they had a talent show. And I remember wanting to enter under the group name of kind of cool kids, like a little rap band. Rap group, and I remember sending this application in, not having the people behind me, but thinking, okay, if I do get further on, then I'm just going to get a group of people together with me to come on the show. So like thinking about little things like that, I think there were kind of, I guess, little signs of, I don't know if I would call it leadership, but initiating things. I think starting things up.
That sort of desire or instinct to take responsibility, I think, is at the heart of leadership. Because I think sometimes leaders, or a lot of leaders I've spoken to, say they've become leaders by accident. They've almost sort of stumbled into it, because they were trying to do something else. Was that true for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think also it's interesting because I remember when I became a manager for the first time, that was quite a difficult transition. At the same time, throughout kind of all my studies and everything, I've always known that I wasn't necessarily a creative producer. I was someone that would support creative producers and kind of, help them advance, or I'd be sort of on the periphery, like I did fashion promotion and marketing. So rather than doing fashion design, I did fashion promotion and marketing, which was all around kind of like helping people that were fashion designers or fashion companies to push forward. And I think that's the kind of role that I've always taken. Again, I remember, I don't know if it was early in my 20s or late teens, I kind of had this idea that I wanted to set up this collective of artists and set up a studio where I'd bring artists together and help them, with their practices. And I guess, that's the kind of tone that my life has kind of taken around that.
And what was the journey from that age to when you formed Bracket?
Oh, okay. So I had a couple of jobs in my early 20s to late 20s. I did an MA in enterprise and management for the creative arts. Got another job, and that after that, which was my late 20s, and that's when I left. That was my last employed position, and after that, I left to start up Bracket. So it was kind of my late 20s.
So through that sort of journey of your 20s of going from employee to making the decision to take the entrepreneurial freelance route, did you have any mentors or people who gave you good advice during that time?
Lots. Names I'm not going to remember, but I remember my MA being particularly being a particular turning point. The lead instructor there, Liz Lydiot, was a massive champion of people like me, people that, again, worked on the kind of periphery of creative production. They weren't perhaps creative producers themselves, but they wanted to sort of turn them into enterprise. And it was quite interesting because I didn't take that MA necessarily to develop entrepreneurial skills. I took it because at the time I was working in a lot of organisations that supported creative businesses, and I actually wanted to understand a little bit more about what they were facing as creative businesses. So I took the MA to help myself find better ways of supporting them, and I came out the other end with a business idea. And I definitely put it down to Liz and a lot of the tutors on that MA helping me to see that perhaps starting up my own thing was a possibility for me.
So what was the initial idea for Bracket, and has it changed over the years?
Yeah, it's massively changed. I mean, the core of it has not changed. The core of it, collaboration, people working together, creativity, productivity, that's always been there. But the initial idea for Bracket, as I mentioned, I used to work in an industry that supported creative businesses, so people like designers and illustrators and artists that were self-employed and wanted to set up their own practices. My MA was for me about finding out how to support them more effectively. And when I did all of my reading during my MA, we were really encouraged to look into the makeup of the creative industries and sort of what was happening in the creative industries, particularly in the UK at that time. And there was a lot of government support for the creative industries. And I just got very hooked. I just gravitated to, I think, the word collaboration. It just seemed to pop up in so much of the reading that I was doing. And I was kind of like, there's more to this than what is currently being offered through our organisations. The organisations that I was working for, they do set up the environment for networking and for creative businesses to meet. But what I was sensing was there was something beyond that. It wasn't just about kind of getting them together. It was like, how do you really help them to forge relationships and partnerships that are going to help them advance their businesses? So the original idea for Bracket was essentially that. It was kind of bringing independent creative businesses and freelancers into teams, temporary teams that would develop ideas and deliver projects for clients, almost like an agency, but a virtual agency, because, everyone had never met before and it was sort of these temporary teams. So that was the first iteration of Bracket. And at the time, things like, for me anyway, Facebook and sort of Basecamp, all of these kind of online tools were very new to me at the time. And I saw potential. It was like, okay, these online tools means that people don't necessarily need to be in the same office together. They don't necessarily need to be even in the same like geographical location, we can use these online tools to pull people together into projects and run them that way. So that was really sort of the inspiration. And I left my job, launched Bracket. And I think what was interesting was when I brought project teams together, again, I keep on saying this, I wasn't a creative sort of producer, I wasn't a content creator. I saw my role as the person that would, select the right people for the team based on what the client needed, and making sure that those, the expertise, there was a good mix of expertise, and even sort of, down to personalities. Are these people going to complement each other? So that was the first step, but then also creating the environment for these people that had never met before to collaborate effectively. So I would bring people together and almost do like a brainstorm. And I didn't realise at the time that what I was doing was facilitation. And some reason, maybe because of all the stuff that we've spoken about in terms of me initiating things and my desire to kind of support people in their craft, I actually ended up being quite good at it without even realising that facilitation was the thing that I was doing. And some people would point that out to me and say, actually, that thing that you're doing, like, it's great that you're bringing a team together, but actually what we want is you to come and do that, what you're doing with that team, with our team, inside an organisation. And that's when I saw the potential for helping teams that were already formed and were kind of perhaps working through challenges. Maybe they needed to brainstorm around a new idea together. They needed to brainstorm through a challenge or problem solve together, or, plan ahead together. And clients were increasingly starting to hire me specifically to do that for them. It sort of evolved from there, because, it moved from me facilitating these one-off workshops that were more kind of creative brainstorming into sort of really starting to understand a little bit more about the dynamics of teams that work together over a period of time. And that's how sort of Bracket has evolved into what it is today, which is more of a team culture consultancy.
It's so interesting. And there's so many people, including myself, whose career specialism has almost emerged while they were doing something else. And I wonder if a lot of it is that Dunning-Kruger thing of thinking something isn't valuable because you find it easy. But you find it easy because you're good at it.
Right.
So you're thinking that's not very valuable, that thing I do there, because that's the easy bit, the facilitation.
100%.
There's this bit over here that's hard, that must be more valuable.
Absolutely.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
When, maybe it's good career advice to find the thing that you find easier than other people.
I think it is. I was really shocked when I had the first person tell me that thing you're doing, people will pay you for it. I had no idea. Honestly, had no idea.
It's interesting.
It is. And I think, sort of the thing about facilitation as well, a big part of what I do is around helping people to develop facilitation skills. And I do see, we'll probably talk about this later, but I do see it as a really key part in the way that we work. I think I naturally sort of was a natural facilitator. And at the same time, I do think it is a skill that can be cultivated.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so you mentioned in the intro that you have one book out and another one out very soon. What led to you writing and becoming an author?
Oh gosh. Yeah, so I think the first book that I wrote, A Pocket Guide to Effective Workshops, that kind of came about by accident, to be honest. I had someone approach me and asked me to write this book. It's actually, it started off as a co-authoring project, and for other reasons, the co-author at the time decided that they wanted to step away from the project, and I ended up finishing and writing the book myself. But it came by accident. I wasn't thinking about writing a book. And, it's helped a lot of people. I mean, it's something that people say to me that they sort of reference quite a lot. It's not a massive book. It's a pocket guide. It's like 10,000 words. But it was just a very kind of simple step-by-step. This is how you prepare for, facilitate and follow up on a workshop. And then I think, for me, the transition that Bracket has gone through has shown me that workshops, this is a phrase I use in the book, workshops are more than a one-off event. Actually, sort of when I've had the opportunity to work with teams over a period of time and run a series of workshops, I was noticing that it didn't just change the way they were interacting together in the workshop, but also had an impact on how they worked together overall. And I just saw this potential, and I kind of coined this phrase workshop culture. And I did a talk, did a couple of talks about it. And every time I did this talk and sort of mentioned this phrase workshop culture, it just seemed to really resonate with people. So I'm like, I kind of need to probably sort of download my thoughts a little bit more and distill this into something. And it's taken me a while, actually. I mean, I think the first time I used the phrase workshop culture was probably in 2016, which is a year after my first book came out. I got the idea that I wanted to write the book in 2017, and it's now being published in 2023.
Yeah,
so
sounds about right.
yeah, you can see sort of like how long it's taken me to really get everything out there. But yeah, I guess that's the journey. I don't know if it was sort of intentional. I want to write a book. It was more that this feels like I probably should write a little bit more about this concept.
So is there a style of leadership that you think is most effective in workshop culture?
Yeah, it's definitely this facilitative leadership. I mean, again, my passion is around collaboration and sort of how you bring people together, how do you make the most out of everyone. And the reason I've developed this concept of workshop culture is that I saw when I was facilitating workshops, that's exactly what a facilitator is doing.
Yeah.
They're bringing people together, they're making sure the environment is available for people to speak up, to share. It's psychologically safe, and people are generating good ideas, there's progress, all of those kinds of things. And we kind of need those things every day, not just in a 3-hour, even full day event. Yeah. Most facilitators will can often relate to that. We've had a really great workshop, and then sort of, the next day everyone goes back to their desks and it's like business as usual. And so for me, it's like, well, what can leaders learn from what facilitators do in those workshops to get more of that effect or those outcomes that facilitators are getting in workshops in everyday work?
Yeah, absolutely. And it so resonates with me and all the work I've done to define the liberated leadership model is I've seen so many people start their leadership journey thinking that their job is to tell everyone what to do. And people just don't want that. People just want all the things you've just mentioned. They want the leader to genuinely care for them as people, increasingly care about the mission, articulate that mission, and then create an environment where people can collaboratively respond to that. So let's break that down then and talk about some of the liberated leadership pillars and see how they resonate to that style of leadership within workshop culture.
I just want to say I'm really excited about this because I really do feel that there's a lot that we talk about that really aligns. In terms of your liberated leadership workshop culture. There's a lot of crossover.
Excellent. And
a lot of connection. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's start with this then. So a lot of things, most things don't work out as they're planned, right? At least not the first time. So what's your approach, or the approach you think is most effective for a leader for discovering insights and opportunities in those sometimes challenging situations, perhaps where things have gone wrong? So how do you turn setbacks into moments of discovery?
I think it's a slight step before that, and I think it comes down to mindset. And it's about shifting to a mindset where you might be experimenting. And so you see those kind of setbacks, not as setbacks, but as learning opportunities. You think, okay, this is something that I'm trying out. You're also getting a little bit more comfortable with the sort of ambiguity and the uncertainty that might come from trying something that you don't know is going to work. So I think it's a step before that. It's kind of, approaching situations with an air of curiosity, looking at it as, look, I'm trying something out, and everything that happens is going to be something that I can take to build on for the experience next time. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, I don't know if this resonates with you, but I think the mindset, I totally agree, is massive. But also how the response to the failure, if you like, in inverted commas, if the leader responds in a "oh no" kind of way, they're probably going to suppress that learning that could go on there and discovery. Whereas if they can respond in a more aha kind of way, I think comes from that same mindset. You've got a good chance of gleaning the learning that's possible, because I think you learn more from when things go wrong than when they go right. Would you agree
really
with that?
do, yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm just also thinking about, an example, a personal example within my business. And, I've been working with one of my team members, and we were trying out a new system, and we had no idea of the things that would go wrong. We were sort of like, going ahead with this process that we'd kind of worked out, and we were hitting all these barriers. And it's kind of like, do you know what? It's actually much better to hit these barriers early on and learn from it, and kind of then reiterate and tweak the process, rather than later when we've kind of got so far into it that it's very hard to undo things.
Yeah.
So it's also that little and often, I think, that sort of, not launching into things in a massive way, but taking sort of small steps so that it feels safer to try certain things.
And this is the very foundation of psychological safety, as you mentioned earlier, wasn't it? Is absolutely critical that we respond in that way. And I do think one of the things that's important when we mention psychological safety is to say it's not incompatible with having really high standards.
Absolutely.
And it's not about being nice to everyone. You'll probably 100%. Hear more feedback in a psychologically safe environment
100%.
than any other.
Yeah.
So I think that's important if we're going to discover and learn together.
Definitely.
Okay, awesome. So let's move on to focus. So when I think about almost all modern work environments are incredibly chaotic and diverse, and finding what we should focus on, I think, is a real key job of a leader. So in focus, I think emphasizing being fully present to the moment, because it's actually way harder than it may seem when we live in a world of smartphones, of information overload. How, as a leader, can you be fully present to your team? And how would you say you maintain your presence, or help leaders maintain their presence to help teams stay focused on their goals, especially in fast-paced, distracting environments?
Yeah. I love this question, and I was kind of, thinking about this pillar before. I mean, personally, what I try to do is I try to minimise decision making in the moment. So as much as I can make sort of decisions beforehand, it kind of gives me more space in the moment to respond. So, for example, very basic thing is that I will plan out my week before the week comes. So not even just, what I'm doing on each day in terms of appointments, but all of my tasks and what tasks I'm going to do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So when I get to my desk, I've already decided what I need to do on a given day based on priorities. And so if anything pops up, then I'm kind of like, I know where my priorities are and what I need to come back to. Related to sort of leadership, I think it's a similar thing. It's like, how can you facilitate decision making before the moment that you need to make a decision, or you need to respond to something? So with the leader, with their team, how can you make very clear what the vision of the team is, and ensure that everyone is aligned on the bigger picture? And that's super clear. Everyone's laser focused. There's no kind of question as to what it is we're all doing together. And then the second thing is, how can you create values that support you in that journey to get into that vision? And so your values as a team become almost like a decision-making filter.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I think, I can't remember who the quote is from, but our values are what tell us what to do when we don't know what to do.
Exactly.
Like, if you can always go back and use them as a razor, which will, of the multiple ways we could go here, which one is the fullest expression of our values, is a great razor. I thought you touched on something really important at the start of your answer there about minimising decision-making in the moment. Because I think a lot of leaders, and I certainly had this when I first went into leadership roles, of feeling like I wasn't doing my job as a leader, or that I was being a weak leader, which was an interesting fear in itself, if I didn't have a decision on the spot. And actually, it took a while to learn that often that the stronger thing to say is, that's really interesting new information that we've just learned together here. I'm going to take that on board and reflect on it, and I will come back in whatever period of time.
Yeah.
With the position on that, do you find that kind of leadership confidence journey is common? Do you see that with leaders quite a bit?
And it's this is sort of an area that I really empathise with the leaders on, the leaders that I work with. The traditional view of leadership is that the leader has all of the answers.
Correct.
And they know everything. And when somebody comes to them with a question, they're meant to be able to answer it like that. And the transition to almost, being able to take that pause. We're not. I don't think leaders are naturally trained to be like that, from what they see, and to what the kind of common rhetoric is around leadership. So it's almost like unlearning that as a response, and learning to take that pause and feeling comfortable, because in that moment there is a massive amount of vulnerability to kind of say, do you know what, I don't know right now, and the feelings that might come up around, what is that other person thinking of me? And what does that mean? Like you said, what does that mean about me as a leader? But it is the way to go. I wouldn't say on every single decision. Sometimes things do need a quick response, right? But generally, if we're sort of engaging our team and we want that kind of collaborative atmosphere, then knowing when to take that pause and kind of say, I don't know right now, or even sort of finding a way to open up the discussion with that team member and coaching them through finding the solution themselves it's a real challenging shift. And not even just in terms of mindset, right? It's in terms of the urgency of everything that we have to work to. It's easier to give an answer rather than it is to kind of take a breath and say, do you know what, I'm going to think on this.
Really good point, actually, because now you've taken the issue away with you by doing that, whereas you've potentially pushed it back. That's a really good point. There's a Voltaire quote, actually, that doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. And I keep that as a razor sometimes. It's okay to stay in the maybe, which doesn't mean, because you can always offer, as a leader, a holding position. This is what I know now, but I want some reflection time.
Definitely.
And I personally think that's a really powerful way of leading, and I've come to realise that, and not a weak way of leading at all. Okay, let's move on to belief, which for me relates to having a quiet ego, generating belief in others. So how do you balance self-confidence with humility in your leadership style, particularly given that you're feeling that a facilitative style is the most effective within workshop culture?
I mean, personally, when you asked that question, I'm not sure that I do manage it very well at all, to be honest.
It's hard, right?
It's really hard. But I think, one of the things about a facilitator, when you have got an identity as a facilitator, and this is different from being a facilitative leader, when you've got an identity as a facilitator, i.e. you're going in to support a team as an external person that someone has brought in to help lead a discussion, you're not actually meant to be a subject matter expert. Like it's not your job to know, the content. You are actually there to get the content out of others. And so actually, when you're in that position, it's okay to sort of ask stupid questions. Because you are sort of, entering with a beginner's mindset. There's a balance. I mean, I think, how I handle that as a facilitator, and, there have been situations where there's been a little bit less of a clear line in terms of, facilitator, content contributor. I have to be really clear as to when I'm in each of those roles. So when am I doing pure facilitation, i.e. I'm not here to give ideas and thoughts, and when am I stepping into the role of the expert on this, and be very clear about when I'm in each of those roles, so I don't create confusion in the room. It's the same, I learnt this on the coaching course that I did as well, in that, when you're coaching, it's more about asking questions and drawing out the answers in the person that you're coaching. But there may be times within a coaching session that you do want to step into saying, I just want to share a bit of my experience here, or I've seen this happen before. And you have to be very clear about that transition, and say, look, I'm just going to step into a mode where I want to share a piece of information with you. And then when you finish sharing that piece of information, okay, right, I'm now stepping back into coach mode. So I wonder whether it is about knowing, sort of being clear in your head sort of when you're navigating those two roles and when one might benefit over the other.
I think that, to me, that's directly analogous with leadership role as well, because I think so much of effective leadership is getting the best out of other people. Excuse me, even if you are a subject matter expert, there's almost certainly a stronger idea than either of us have if we're to collaborate together, if we can create the space to find it. So often when I'm coaching leaders, one of the hardest journeys, and I certainly went on it, is to realise it's just not about me. And that's how I satisfy the ego part of it, because a phrase you hear in business a lot is park your ego at the door, which I think is a nonsense phrase, because you can't divorce yourself from your ego. It's part of the human condition. The more sane goal for me is to try to just acknowledge the ego's going to do its ego thing, but in the room it's not about me. And I think being a facilitator, and I really like your distinction between the roles within facilitation and expert, is a great training for that kind of 100%. Ego management. Is that something you find yourself accidentally becoming an expert in?
Well, I mean, I think you know what's interesting is that coming from it from a pure facilitation point of view, and not knowing, the subject matter or maybe not knowing the subject matter or knowing as much about the subject matter as the team that you're working with, and knowing actually your role is very powerful in that, in terms of outcomes and ideas. Like, it's much more likely that a team is going to adopt and have buy-in to ideas that they've developed themselves, rather than you coming in as a facilitator and saying, I think you should do that. And so, what can we learn from that from leaders? It's the same thing with leaders. Whether you know about the content or not, your team is going to be much more likely to be invested and engaged and motivated by, having their thoughts acknowledged within what they're moving, the idea that they're moving forward with.
Yeah.
Even though, again, in the moment, it's much easier to say, this is what I think. Actually, in the long term, you're going to get better results by ensuring that everyone's voice is heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads me very naturally into talking about trust. Trust is a key pillar of liberated leadership. And I think building trust often requires patience.
100%.
And how do you build and maintain trust with your teams, and how does patience play a role in that process for you?
Well, I mean, again, from a sort of facilitator point of view, patience is an absolute must when you're leading sessions. The patience, again, not to step in, the patience to kind of let the team figure out things themselves, the patience when you hit a sticky moment within the workshop, when things feel really messy, and kind of just taking a step back and kind of knowing, do you know what, the process is there. I've designed this process and I know we will get to the other side. So again, what can leaders learn from that in terms of knowing that, again, it's not about, necessarily moving through things quickly and cleanly, but that process of working through the mess together as a team and being able to take a step back and sort of look at that process is what's going to be most effective. And I guess I'm sort of answering my question as I'm speaking, because I think there's something else in the, we've spoken about the intentionality. Patience is easier when you are clear on when you know what it is that you're working towards.
Yes.
So if you have a sort of a clear outcome in mind, and you've been intentional about a process that you might use to get there, then again, that patience is easier, because you know that it's coming, the breakthrough is coming, because you've kind of, considered all the dynamics, you know where you're trying to get to, you know what the challenges are that you might need to work through. So it becomes a little bit easier when you're clear on the outcome.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I think it can be quite anxiety inducing when you're like, you've got to trust that breakthrough is coming, and it is coming. And the simplest definition, I think, of how do you build trust, simplest answer to the question of how do you build trust is act in a trustworthy way. You demonstrate trust, you're likely to generate trust. And that means trusting that people are going to access their own wisdom, that something is going to emerge, and in as you've articulated beautifully there, trusting the process as well, and allowing that anxiety of, I don't know if we're going to get this, but I feel it will come, and I'm going to trust the people, the talent in the room, and the process that we've established to get there. So I think that's, I love that.
I would also say, in my years of facilitation, I don't think there's been a workshop where I've got to a moment and I've been like, is this going to work? It happens every single time,
right?
And you're just kind of, I guess, like building that muscle, because every time it happens, I'm like, no, I've been here before. Like, I know that we do get through it, but it doesn't stop you feeling that in the moment, that anxiety.
And just allowing that
absolutely,
anxiety to be. Okay. So let's move on to a little bit to talking about ambition, because I think it's an interesting touch point for leaders. So in Liberated Leadership, the pillar of ambition focuses on outcomes rather than just output. Can you share a little bit about how you define and pursue ambitious goals that drive meaningful results with teams?
When you mentioned about the outcomes and the outputs, my mind instantly went to one of the models that I use in planning meetings. And I think it's really important to define those two things. The model that I use, essentially, sort of before I go into any particularly complex discussion with a team, then I'll map out 3 different areas: purpose and outcomes, which is like, what's the general direction that we're going to? Where do we want to be by the end of this workshop? What do you want people to feel, experience, think, do as a result of this workshop? Outputs are tangible things that we want to create.
Right.
As a result of this workshop or meeting, a plan, a set of ideas, decisions being made. And then I'll go into a process where I'm just brainstorming all of the questions. It's called, I can't remember who coined this term. It might be someone called Warren Berger, question storming.
Yes. I think he wrote A More Beautiful Question.
A More Beautiful Question, yeah. So question storming, which is I sort of just brainstorm all of the questions that I want to ask, that I'm curious about. And that's how I kind of plan the sessions, kind of think, let's group sort of themes or questions together. And so that all comes from being clear on the outcomes and knowing the difference between outcomes and outputs. And, I don't think it's coincidental that I start that planning process with purpose and outcomes, not with outputs.
Yes. And do you find that the outcomes are fairly stable, whereas the outputs can be highly volatile?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's key to understanding why leading through outcomes is a way more effective and scalable form of leadership.
Yeah, because the outputs may change in the discussion through that discovery that you're having as a team. The things that you thought that you needed to produce may change, but the general direction is going to be the same. It's, what I said around vision and values. The vision, the direction that you're going in, the end where you want to end up, is often so compelling that it's actually how you get there that can change. But that position will always, most of the time, will kind of be pretty stable.
Love that. And then I think that's how teams can find their own ambition, almost, that is in that sweet spot, the classic mastery zone thing of beyond what we know we can achieve and short of what it's not credible for us to achieve, is that sweet spot of mastery zone that we know engages people.
Yeah. And it's the classic sort of, let's figure out what we're going to do, and then you get there in the way that works, and whether that is producing different outputs, right? But the outcomes will always be, you'll always be aligned on those.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so let's move on to pillar 6, feedback. An interesting topic for me, so much in all modern business environments. I just feel there's a shortage of effective feedback generally.
Yes.
Do you have any strategies or tactics you can share for creating an environment where open and honest feedback is encouraged and valued?
Yeah. Do you know what? Feedback is something that I think about so much. And I think it's one of those kind of challenges that's always going to be a challenge. And it's not because there's a lack of how we give effective feedback. It's because the other side is that it's also difficult to receive feedback. So I think when we talk about feedback, we shouldn't just talk about giving feedback. We should talk about giving and receiving feedback, because there's two sides to the coin.
Great point.
And, in my experience, I've run sessions with teams where I've sort of asked the question on feedback, where I've asked the question, what does it feel like when you're about to give feedback to someone, what feelings come up for you? And we talk around those feelings. And I said, when you're about to receive feedback from someone, what feelings come up for you? And it's so clear that both sides of that coin are uncomfortable for people, giving feedback and receiving. So, we can... we definitely do need to learn how to give feedback that is more constructive and more effective, and it's going to be heard and it's in service of the other person. And at the same time, we also need to build the muscle for receiving feedback and accept that both sides of those things are challenging and awkward and uncomfortable, and we just need to keep on sort of pushing through it. I also believe that, when you give feedback, even if you give it in the most effective way, for the person receiving it, it's still going to be difficult to receive. You don't know what history that person has. It could bring, giving feedback in the most effective way could still bring up feelings of shame or embarrassment or frustration, regardless of how that's delivered. So I think it's a kind of a two-sided conversation. And yes, 100%, there are sort of great, good mechanisms and techniques for giving feedback. And I also think, I just spoke about this yesterday, that there's a really great film that I watched. It's one of those films that you watch that is good, and it's also like, it hits so close to the bone, like it cuts so close to the bone, and it's called You Hurt My Feelings.
Oh, wow.
And it's all about, it's total first world problems, but it's all about, a group of people who experience their loved ones not giving them feedback because they don't want to hurt their feelings, or not caring about their feelings and giving them really blunt feedback. And it's just a kind of like a mass of all of those, how it affects all relationships from all different sides. And I think that's just a really good way of kind of seeing that there's just there's so many factors involved. Good feedback, bad feedback, receiving feedback well, receiving feedback terribly, and it's almost like a 2x2 matrix, isn't it? It's like all of those factors involved.
I think you've articulated that really, really eloquently, actually. And I love the focus on feelings. And it reminds me that as a leader and a manager, one of your first jobs is to learn to manage yourself. And in that situation, acknowledging that you don't really want to provide the feedback. Yeah. And because you maybe at some intuitive, instinctive level know that your feedback is going to make you feel that way, uncomfortable, scared possibly, and that it might for the other person trigger those feelings like you mentioned of shame or embarrassment, and just not wanting to be that person, and putting that against knowing that it's necessary to move forward, right? And that I like Brené Brown's description that clear is kind. That we can often convince ourselves that we're being kind by withholding the feedback when we really know in our hearts that the opposite is true. We have to provide it. Most people are just hoping that someone else will provide it. Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess our job really is just to, like you say, be clear, be clear, to be kind. Think about how we're managing that feedback, and if we're sure that we've delivered that feedback in the most effective way with the tools that we have at the time, in a way we can't manage the response of the other person. Yes. So sort of being aware of that as well, but doing everything that we can in the lead up to that to minimise what that other person might. I'm quite a big fan of framing that up front in a feedback environment, of saying, hey, look, I've got some feedback for you today. It might well be difficult to hear. Yeah. this is not about you as a person, and it's not about me as a person. It's about your work and my work together, and it's about us getting to a more effective way of working together. I think that framing, if I'm honest, frees me up from some of my anxiety, and hopefully helps free up the person who's got to receive the feedback as well.
Yeah.
I love your distinction. I haven't actually thought about that, of training on receiving feedback is really smart. I think that should really be in the arsenal of all effective companies, I think, actually, because the focus is usually all on the giving, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the final pillar, and in many ways the core pillar of liberated leadership, which is authenticity. So how do you ensure that you bring your true self to your leadership role, and how do you encourage team members to create a culture of genuine communication and collaboration?
Gosh, I guess the thing is that with authenticity, it's almost like an oxymoron to say that you're being authentic, right? Because it's the minute you say you're being authentic, then are you really? You know? So I don't know how to answer that question though, but I guess, I guess it possibly comes back to the conversation that we're having on values. Like, I know, in my heart, deep down, like at the root of my belly, that collaboration is the thing that I'm passionate about, just getting people working well together. I've got, a strong passion that we create workplaces where people can thrive, and we create workplaces without unnecessary drama and politics so that people can just get on with work. And, how do we equip people with the tools to see when they're engaging in interactions that, perhaps aren't useful, feel very real in the moment, but perhaps aren't useful in the bigger scheme of things. And so when I kind of turn up with that in mind, then I'm just sort of operating in that space. That's what I'm getting towards. I guess the only times that I've ever sort of, swayed from that is when, I guess when there's been doubt in me, maybe, not being sort of trusting of my own expertise, or I guess, being, in a sense, feeling that might be a bit utopian as well, and sort of questioning that. But when I do really lead with that, then I know that, those are the results that I get. Again, it's trusting the process. It's, knowing that I really do believe in the thing that I want those teams to achieve and my clients to achieve.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Do you think fake it till you make it is good advice or bad advice for a young leader? Yes and no. I mean, I don't like that phrase at all. But there have been times when you almost, I guess it's not faking it till you make it, but it's almost like giving yourself a sense of, well, if I want to get this outcome, what are the things that are required of me to do that? And it's again the same with the sort of the values with the team. If we want to get to this outcome, not only what do we need to do, but how do we need to be? And sometimes those elements of how you might need to be might be a little bit of a stretch, sort of recognising that, that's not how I naturally operate. Yes.
So trying as much as you can to kind of practice what those being things are in order to get those results. So if it is, I know that I need to, I know that I need to really sort of explain this goal in a very, very clear way, but I'm used to, I know that I'm a rambler. What are the things that I need to do in order to communicate clearly, and how best can I show up in that space rather than sort of in my natural space? So if that's faking it until you make it, then yes, but maybe it's more of a kind of stretch, challenging yourself.
And this is something I've thought about a lot, because it's been so important to me to be authentic. But a conclusion I've come to is being authentic can't be being unfiltered. It can't just be, I'm being authentic, so here's a completely unfiltered version of myself.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to play a role. You mentioned right at the start that you considered yourself quite a shy teenager, but it is necessary to be quite outgoing in a lot of situations, particularly as a facilitator. So I'd imagine that involved playing a role for you. And I think that has to be okay. And the razor of being true to personal values, I think, is key. obviously I think integrity is non-negotiable. But then, so it's okay to edit myself from a whole. What is not okay is to pretend that I've got a wider palette to edit from than I have. That's how I guide myself through authenticity. Okay, excellent. What leaders do you admire who are in any form of business or public life at the moment?
What leaders do I admire? Do you know what's interesting? I think based on that question that we've just discussed, I think the leaders that I admire most are the ones that really are able to show up as themselves, like show up as their true selves. I mean, I'm sort of not even thinking about sort of leaders in the business space, but, you know, I have for sort of most of my adult life loved Erykah Badu as a musician, and she's just someone that, you know, she's comfortable with kind of transforming herself. She doesn't lead, she doesn't follow trends. She's a trend maker. I guess she challenges herself. So I think those are the kinds of leaders that I admire. And it's not easy to be, you know, it's not easy to be like that, particularly in the business world. No. But I think that's where I take, you know, a little bit of inspiration from. Not saying, you know, I'm an Erykah Badu type person, but I look at someone like her and think, do you know what, how can I sort of take elements of that for myself?
There's something powerful in there as well, that about being authentic doesn't mean not being committed to transition and growth as well, because if you're going to grow, then by definition you're changing, of course.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the self you're being authentic to is evolving as well. So that's 100%. Why that kind of palette thing is important to me. Okay, so one thing I'd like to talk about that I think's the sort of dirty secret of leadership in a way, that's not talked about perhaps enough is the fact that leadership can be very stressful positions. What do you think it is that drives leaders, and perhaps you've had personal experience of this, to take an unhealthy level of personal responsibility for the activity or people they're leading?
You know, one of the things that I think is a challenge when you are kind of transitioning into these new models of leadership, like the liberated leadership as a model, you know, it's a new way of thinking and framing. What you are dealing with is that you're dealing with so many different factors within a system. And your role as a leader really is to be aware of what all those factors are and know at which point you need to dial up and dial down. So I guess one of the easiest ways for me to explain this is within the book I have a model which I look at, you know, as a leader you need to balance between people and business, thinking and doing. And I guess in the traditional style of leadership, leaders have turned up and said, do you know what, this is my style and this is my way, and, you know, this is just the way that I am, you're all going to deal with it. Whereas sort of a modern leader has to have more agility, and they need to, you know, there are going to be some times when there's a lean towards the business. There's going to be times when there's a lean towards people, or a skew. But your job is not to skew towards either one of those permanently, but to kind of constantly be balancing and knowing. So I think when leaders have taken more of a personal responsibility and taken that on their shoulders, it's a balance almost towards the other end, not kind of sensing actually there's also the business that I kind of need to straddle as well. So yeah, I think it's the awareness of all of those different factors. Again, sort of a conversation that I had just yesterday, I kind of described it as almost like a studio mixer. You've got all these kind of little dials that you're kind of constantly turning up and turning down and tuning in and tuning out. And you've got to listen as to when you need to turn up on one and tune out on the other. And that's a really challenging position to be in. But if you're in a situation where one is too skewed heavily, then you know that there's not a good balance there. I don't know if that makes sense. Kind of a very long-winded way.
No, I understand. And I think all leaders suffer the stress of leadership, but very few talk about it. There's some research that Kaler's did in 1975, which when I found it resonated very strongly with me. And there were 5 key stress drivers in there, which are be perfect, be strong, hurry up, please people, and try hard.
Wow.
Which are all things you might well do, but it's when it's an excess of them that you're likely to go in across healthy barriers.
Yeah.
And I found myself trying to do all 5, actually. Yeah. I wonder if one of those jump out at you when I was listing those off?
Yeah, all of them actually. Sort of, I think it was like, oof, yeah, I resonate with those, yeah.
Yeah, and do you think that most leaders are experiencing and not talking about it as well?
100%. I think, like we say, leadership is very stressful and we're not yet in a place, I think there's more conversation about it, but we're not yet in a place where that vulnerability as a leader is, I think people talk about it, but doing it in practice is very, very challenging.
Awesome. So what's the future for you? How do you continue to learn? How do you continue to grow? What's next for Alison and what's next for Bracket?
Oh, well, the book is coming out in about a month's time. So that's going to be a big learning curve. We were talking about it just before. It's very different to my first book. It's 50,000 words. It's a concept that I'm kind of putting out in the world. And I've gone through sort of a bit more of a sort of traditional publishing process where there is a lot of kind of marketing and promotion to do. That's going to be a stretch for me. I didn't really do that much of my first book, so there's definitely going to be some learning around that. Do you know what? I think I feel very lucky that the work that I do is really varied. So when you get to work with sort of different clients and get an insight, and your clients are trusting you to work with their teams, you're just learning constantly. You can run, I'm just talking about the process of workshops, projects, whatever, engagements, but you can have a structure for one specific workshop that you run with one team and you have a certain experience, and you run it with a completely different team and have a completely different experience, and there's always things learning. I think, I've been running Bracket for almost 14 years, probably facilitating properly for, maybe sort of 11, 12 of those. And after every workshop, I still kind of sit down and think, oh, there's something there that I've learned or I could have done differently. So I think I'm learning a lot through practice.
Awesome. And so some closing thoughts then. So if you think back to someone who's like the Alison you described in your 20s, who's thinking, oh, actually, I might be a leader here. I might be in a leadership position, or maybe they've found themselves in a leadership position and they're trying to find their way based on all the things we've talked about, the workshop culture and the leadership model within that, and all the pillars of liberated leadership. What words of wisdom would you give to a version of you, your younger self now?
Yeah. I think, that appreciating that it is a transition and it is learning. I think organisations, so it's very common, we talk about this all the time, that organisations often put people into leadership positions when they're not necessarily wanting to lead people. They might want to lead in their subject matter, but not necessarily lead people. And so that recognition that this is something that you can learn and train in. Yeah, some people are natural people leaders, but other people might need to develop that, and deciding whether that's something that you want to do. And if you are going to do, recognising that you're not going to be perfect straight away. I'd also kind of say, perhaps by sort of reading things like Liberated Leadership, or learning a bit more about that and different styles of leadership, being clear on the kind of leader that you want to be. Because I think there are, again, we are in a bit of a transition, but making sure that the people that you're learning from are displaying the types of leadership that you want to also transition into, and being clear on that. And if you know in your hearts that this is what the results that you want to get with your teams, and then kind of going full in on that, without being swayed by sort of other types of leaders that might not be, or leadership that might not be as effective.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Best of luck with the book launch.
Thank you.
Drop some links below for people who want to go and check that out. And all the best with taking workshop culture out into the world. And thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.